They say the internet never forgets. But here's what nobody tells you. Sometimes the internet doesn't just remember. Sometimes it waits. It waits until the timing is perfect. It waits until the stakes are sky high and the whole world is watching. And then, out of absolutely nowhere, it releases the footage. And that is exactly what just happened, because a video that has allegedly been sitting in the dark for over 2 decades suddenly surfaced today, and it shows a young Beyoncé, barely 18 or 19 years old, sitting in a room packed with grown men. Industry men. Powerful men. Men with money. Men with credits. Men with the kind of connections that could make or break a career with a single phone call. And at one point in this footage, she gets up, walks across that room, and sits down right in one of those men's laps. On camera. While everybody watches. And the second this Beyoncé video hit the timeline, the entire internet froze, looked at each other, and asked the same chilling question at the exact same time. What did it actually take for a young woman to make it in this industry back then? And who, exactly, was protecting these girls while it was all happening? Now let's be real clear about something right out the gate. This is not some blurry fan recording shot from outside an arena. This is reportedly private, behind-the-scenes footage, the kind of tape that was never, ever supposed to see the light of day. And yet here it is, circulating today of all days, and everybody with 2 eyes and a working brain is asking the same 2 questions. Number 1, who released this Beyoncé tape? And number 2, why now? After all these years of silence, why today? Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time pulling up, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, tap the bell, and drop a like so the algorithm knows you're here for the conversations nobody else wants to have. And quick housekeeping before we get into it. This video is strictly for news commentary, entertainment, and educational purposes. Everything discussed here is alleged, reported, or public speculation unless stated otherwise, and fair use applies to all reference material. Now that we've handled that, let's get into what is actually on this tape. Because the details matter. Every single one of them. Picture the scene. The room is low-lit and intimate, more like a private lounge than any kind of professional meeting space. There are no women visible in the frame, none, just men. Older men. And in the middle of all of them sits a teenage Beyoncé Knowles, fresh-faced, soft-spoken, still years away from becoming the most protected, most controlled, most untouchable brand in modern music. And as the camera keeps rolling, Beyoncé gets up from her chair, walks over, and lowers herself right into one of these men's laps. Just like that. Casual. Comfortable. Like it's the most natural thing in the world. Like she's done it before. And listen, before anybody sprints to the comment section typing, she was 18, she was grown. Pump your brakes for 1 second. Nobody is disputing her legal age. That's not the conversation. What people are questioning is the environment, the power dynamic, the optics, the fact that a teenager standing at the very front door of her career is sitting in a room full of wealthy, connected, older men, and not one single person in that room seems to find any of it strange. Nobody shifts in their seat. Nobody clears their throat. Nobody suggests that maybe, just maybe, she should sit literally anywhere else. And when you study how these men are looking at Beyoncé, the long stares, the slow smiles, the way one of them tracks her every single move while she's mid-sentence, you begin to understand exactly why this footage has set the internet on fire. Because it doesn't look like a business meeting. It doesn't look like a family gathering. It looks like something else entirely. Within minutes of this Beyoncé video dropping, the comment sections turned into full-blown forensic laboratories. People started freezing frames, zooming in, circling hands, analyzing body language like it was a crime scene photo. And the number 1 question that kept coming up, over and over and over again, was this. Who is the man in the chair? Because whoever he is clearly comfortable. He is clearly powerful. And according to the streets, he is not just some random industry suit. Word is, this is a man with deep ties to one of the biggest superstars who ever lived. A man who, on this very tape, allegedly picks up the phone and calls Michael Jackson himself, while a teenage Beyoncé is sitting in his lap. Sit with that for a second. Because by the time we're done here, you're going to understand why people are saying this tape doesn't just raise questions about one night. It cracks open a much bigger, much darker conversation about how young women were handled, positioned, and traded in that era of the music business. The double standards. The fathers who guarded certain doors while holding other doors wide open. The whispers about what was really expected of the girls who wanted a seat at the table. So lock in, because this goes so much deeper than one lap, one room, and one phone call. So let's talk about the man in the chair, because his identity is half the Beyoncé story. Now, I cannot independently confirm who he is, and I want that on the record, but the streets identified him within hours. According to the online chatter, he is allegedly a producer and longtime industry player who spent years operating in the orbit of Michael Jackson, one of the people reportedly connected to the music, the money, and the machinery around the king of pop. And if that identification is accurate, then what you're watching on this tape is not just a teenager networking. You're watching a teenager being escorted into the throne room, the inner circle, the gatekeepers, the level of the industry that most artists never touch in their entire lives. This was not a meet and greet for Beyoncé. This was an introduction to power. And here's where it gets heavier. Because this same figure has reportedly been wrapped up in serious legal disputes tied to Michael Jackson's world. Lawsuits, money fights, accusations flying in both directions. Allegedly. I want to be very careful with that word, allegedly, because the reporting around these disputes is messy, the claims are contested, and everybody involved has their own version of events. But if even half of what's been claimed publicly is true, then this is not a man with a spotless reputation. This is a man whose name makes lawyers nervous. And yet there he sits, comfortable as can be, at the center of the room, with a teenage Beyoncé perched on his lap like it's a family reunion. Now let's walk through the moment itself, slowly, because the sequence is what has people spiraling. Beyoncé is sitting there. The room is chatting. And then the idea comes up. Somebody suggests they call Michael Jackson. Right there, on the spot. And you can almost see her light up from the inside. Because this is Michael Jackson, the idol of idols, the artist she grew up worshipping, the mountain every performer dreams of climbing. The phone starts dialing. The room goes quiet in anticipation. And when that call connects and Beyoncé realizes who is actually on the other end of that line, something happens to her body that the internet has now watched a million times in slow motion. She starts trembling, visibly, uncontrollably, and the man whose lap she's sitting in, he notices. Of course he notices. And on the tape, you can reportedly hear him react to it, teasing her about it. Oh, you shaking. While an entire room of grown men watches this teenage girl vibrate with nerves and excitement on his lap. Now, here's the part that turned the comment sections into a war zone. Because once people got past the trembling, they started zooming in on his hands. Viewers froze the frames and started pointing at where his hands rest while Beyoncé is sitting on him. And I'm not going to tell you what to see. I'm going to let you watch it and decide for yourself. But I will say this. Thousands upon thousands of people watched that footage and came away deeply uncomfortable. Not because of any single frame, but because of the whole picture. A room full of grown men. A teenage girl. A lap. A phone call. And not one adult in the room treating any of it like something worth a second glance. And that right there is the detail I cannot get past. Because even if everything in that room was completely innocent, and maybe it was, why did nobody act like it needed to be? Why was there not one person in that room whose job was to say, hey, why don't you grab a chair? And ask yourself this, because it's the question that launched 1,000 think pieces overnight. Why did a phone call require a lap? Think about it. The phone works exactly the same whether you're sitting on a couch, sitting on a chair, or standing in the corner. Michael Jackson's voice sounds exactly the same through that speaker regardless of where Beyoncé is parked. So why is the gateway to her idol routed through a grown man's lap? Why is access to the biggest star on the planet being brokered with a teenager positioned on someone like she's part of the furniture? Those are the questions this tape forces into the open, and nobody attached to that room has answered a single one of them. Not the producer's camp. Not the family's camp. Nobody. But hold on. Because we haven't even gotten to what Beyoncé does with her hands yet. And that's the detail that sent the conspiracy side of the internet into absolute overdrive. Here's the detail that split the internet straight down the middle. At one point in this footage, while Beyoncé is on that phone, riding that wave of nerves and adrenaline, she raises her hands. And according to half the internet, she throws up a very specific hand sign. The sixes. Now, let me be the responsible adult in the room for 1 second. A hand gesture on a grainy, decades-old video can mean 100 different things, or absolutely nothing at all. Maybe Beyoncé was gesturing while she talked. Maybe she was balancing herself. Maybe she was just a teenage girl moving her hands the way every teenage girl on earth moves her hands when she's excited. That is entirely possible. But you already know the internet was never going to leave it there. Within hours, the conspiracy corners of social media had those frames circled in red, slowed down, annotated, and stitched into compilations about secret hand signals, industry rituals, and who allegedly gets taught what and when. People were saying, and I want to be crystal clear, this is pure internet speculation with zero evidence behind it, that the footage shows a young artist being shown the ropes of something bigger than music. I'm not co-signing that. I am reporting that this is what millions of people are saying they see. And whether you think it's symbolism or complete nonsense, The fact that so many viewers independently zeroed in on the exact same frames tells you something important about how much distrust the public already has for this industry. And that distrust did not come from nowhere. It came from decades of stories exactly like this one. Young women, powerful men, closed doors, and questions that never got answered. Now, to be fair, and I always try to be fair, there is another side to this conversation, and it's already filling up the other half of the comment section. There are plenty of people saying this whole thing is being overblown. That Beyoncé was 18. That it was a different era with a different industry culture. That sitting on someone's lap at an industry gathering in that time period didn't set off the same alarm bells it sets off today. That the trembling was just a starstruck kid talking to Michael Jackson. Which, let's be honest, would make anybody's hands shake. And you know what? That's a fair point. If Michael Jackson called my phone right now, I'd need somebody to hold me up too. So I want to hear from you on this, because this is genuinely where the audience splits right down the middle. Poll question number 1. When you watch that footage, do you see an innocent industry moment from a different era? Or do you see a teenager in a room she had no business being in, surrounded by men who knew exactly what the optics were? Drop your answer in the comments, because I read every single one. But here's the thing, and this is where the entire conversation flips on its head. Because you cannot have this debate about what was normal for the era without remembering one crucial fact about Beyoncé's own family. Because her father, Matthew Knowles, is on record, with one of the most famous protective parent stories in music history. And when you put that story side by side with this tape, the questions get real uncomfortable, real fast. Rewind the clock. Destiny's Child. Baby-faced Beyoncé. Baby-faced LaToya, Kelly. All of them barely into their teenage years. The group gets booked to work with R. Kelly. And Matthew Knowles, the same Matthew who ran the boot camp, who orchestrated the whole rise, who is famously a shark in every business dealing he touches. Matthew reportedly refused to let those girls out of his sight for a single second in that studio. Not for a minute. Not for a bathroom break. When one of them needed to go, he allegedly stood outside the door and waited. He was not playing about R. Kelly getting anywhere near those girls. And you know what? Good. That is exactly what a father is supposed to do. That is what protection looks like. That is the bar. That is the standard. Every parent watching this right now should applaud that behavior, because it is textbook. But here is where the record scratches. Because if Matthew Knowles was that protective, that vigilant, that hair trigger, that ready to body block anybody who looked at his daughter sideways, then how in the world does his teenage Beyoncé end up in a room full of older men with no visible guardian, no visible chaperone, no visible anything, comfortable enough to walk across the room and sit in one of their laps? Where was the R. Kelly Matthew that day? Where was the standing outside the bathroom door Matthew that day? Where was the nobody touches my daughter Matthew when a teenage Beyoncé is being lap-dropped in front of a camera? And that is the question that is burning up group chats and X threads and TikTok comment sections all night long. Because the pattern that is emerging, and I want you to sit with this, is not a pattern of consistent protection. It is a pattern of selective protection. And the variable that seems to determine when protection was on and when protection was off is not the girl's age, and it's not the danger of the situation. According to what people are noticing, the variable was the man's wealth, the man's connections, and, let's just be honest and say the quiet part out loud, because it's what the entire internet is already saying, the man's race. R. Kelly, no matter how famous he was, did not have the level of white, corporate, Hollywood, Michael Jackson adjacent power that the man in that lap allegedly had. And the theory people are building right now is that R. Kelly got the full protective father treatment because R. Kelly could not open the doors that mattered, while the man in the lap got the exact opposite treatment because he could. That is a hard sentence to type. It is a harder sentence to read. And it is the sentence the internet is refusing to unsay tonight. Now, that is a theory. It is not a proven fact. But it is the theory that is driving this Beyoncé conversation, and pretending it isn't happening would be dishonest. So I'm putting it on the table. Comment bait poll question number 2. Was Matthew Knowles' protection genuinely selective? Or is the internet reading way too much into two different situations from two different eras? Drop your take below, because this one is going to divide the room. And here is where I have to zoom out for a second, because this story is not happening in a vacuum. Beyoncé is not the first name in this conversation. She is just the newest name. Because the second this tape dropped, everybody on the internet had the same instinct. Their minds went directly to Rihanna. And you know exactly why. Because Rihanna's story, when you line it up next to what people are alleging about young Beyoncé, has the same haunting shape. Think about it. Rihanna gets signed by Jay-Z as an absolute teenager, barely a legal adult. She is plucked out of Barbados and dropped into the deep end of the biggest, coldest, most predatory music industry on earth. And what happens next is exactly what the tabloids couldn't stop covering. She is suddenly on jets to Dubai. She is suddenly at parties with billionaires. She is suddenly in the front row of every fashion show, in the arms of one wealthy, older, powerful man after another, in a rotation that had the streets whispering the ugliest word imaginable. That Rihanna was, as the rumor goes, being passed around the industry as the price of admission. Now again, allegedly. That is a rumor. Rihanna has never confirmed it. Nobody has confirmed it. It is one of those stories the internet has repeated so many times it feels like fact, even when it isn't. But you cannot pretend the rumor doesn't exist, because it is one of the loudest whispers in music. And now, tonight, that same shape is being drawn around a teenage Beyoncé, a young girl, a powerful older man, a room she should not have been in, a father who was famously protective in one setting and reportedly absent in another, a career trajectory that went vertical immediately afterward. That is not proof. That is a shape. But the shape is the reason this Beyoncé tape has already crossed the 10 million view line before the sun came up. And you cannot talk about this shape without saying Aaliyah's name. You cannot. Because Aaliyah was the blueprint for everything the internet is worried about tonight. Aaliyah, at 15 years old, was in a relationship with R. Kelly. That is not a rumor. That is documented, ugly, on-paper history. She was later linked to Jay-Z. She was later linked to Dame Dash. She was later on movie sets opposite DMX with people wondering if there was something happening there too. She was cycled through the men who ran the industry before she was even old enough to legally sign her own record deal. And then, before she got the chance to grow into her own woman and tell her own story on her own terms, she was gone. Aaliyah is the ghost that haunts every conversation like this one. And when a tape drops of teenage Beyoncé in a room full of older men, Aaliyah's name comes up in the very next breath. Not because the situations are identical, but because the shape rhymes. And there is another name I have to say out loud, because the internet is saying it too. Foxy Brown. Because if the whispers are true, and again, whispers, alleged, and proven, Foxy Brown was another young woman inside that same era, mingling with the same class of powerful men, and she reportedly ended up with a serious health consequence that the streets have tied, rightly or wrongly, to that world. The details are contested. The reporting is scattered. But the story exists, and it exists because too many young women in that specific era ended up with unexplained damage that the industry never accounted for. And the moment you line all of these names up, Aaliyah, Rihanna, Foxy Brown, and now allegedly a teenage Beyoncé, you stop looking at this tape as an isolated incident, and you start looking at it as a data point and a pattern. And that is exactly why this footage is so radioactive. Not because of the lap, not because of the phone call, not because of the trembling, but because it is a receipt for a pattern that a lot of us have been trying to talk about for a very long time. Now let me pivot for a second, because there is another parallel I have to draw here. Janet Jackson. And I mean it. Because if you go back and watch the footage, and there is footage, it exists, it is on the internet, you can find it in 10 seconds. There is a moment where a much younger Janet Jackson is at an industry event, in a room with much older people, and a very famous athlete of that time period is on her in a way that would be a 5-alarm fire in any household on earth. And nobody in that room stops it. Nobody says anything. Everyone is laughing and drinking and carrying on like it's nothing. And when you watch that Janet Jackson footage back to back with this new Beyoncé footage, you realize that the industry did not have a Beyoncé problem or a Janet problem or a Rihanna problem or an Aaliyah problem. The industry had a young black girl problem. And the men and women who were supposed to be gatekeepers, the parents, the managers, the label heads, were reportedly doing calculus about which predators were worth trading their daughters' comfort for. And that is the sentence that ends this era of the music business if the receipts ever fully surface. And one more parallel, because I promise you this ties in. Because I keep thinking about how possessively Michael Jackson himself allegedly acted around Diana Ross for decades. The obsession, the way he talked about her, the public displays that made everybody around him uncomfortable. There have always been whispers that the relationship between Michael Jackson and Diana Ross was not a healthy men-mentee dynamic. And now here we are, decades later, watching a tape where a producer with alleged Michael Jackson connections is dialing Michael Jackson on the phone while a teenage Beyoncé shakes on his lap. The threads are not separate. The threads are the same rope. And let's go even deeper on the money question, because somebody always follows the money, and tonight that somebody is me. Footage like this does not circulate for free. Old industry tapes have a market. There are collectors, there are brokers, there are lawyers who specialize in nothing but the buying and burying of exactly this kind of material. Which means one of two things happened here. Either whoever held this tape decided the money didn't matter anymore and released it out of principle or pure spite, or somebody already tried to sell it, the price got refused, and this release is the revenge. Both of those scenarios tell you the same thing. There is a war happening somewhere behind Beyoncé's walls right now, and this tape is shrapnel from it. Because understand, this is not the kind of material that leaks by accident. Storage drives do not accidentally upload themselves to the internet. Private archives do not accidentally become public. Somebody with access made a choice, and choices like this always have a reason attached to them. And while we are on the subject of access, think about who even had the ability to hold this footage for 20 plus years. Whoever it was had to be inside that room, or 1 degree away from somebody inside that room. That narrows the circle dramatically. We are not talking about a stranger. We are talking about somebody who was trusted enough to be in that room with a teenage Beyoncé, or trusted enough by the person who filmed it to keep it safe for 2 decades. And that, more than anything else on this tape, is the detail that should chill you. Because it means the leak came from inside the house. It always comes from inside the house. Every single time one of these tapes surfaces, the fingerprint traces back to somebody who once ate at the table. So when Beyoncé's team sits down tonight to map out who could possibly be behind this, they are not looking at strangers. They are looking at a very short, very painful list of people they used to call family. And if that list includes the man in the chair himself, well, then this whole story just got a second act that nobody is prepared for. Let's talk about the release itself, because this is the part almost nobody is asking about. And it might be the most important question of all. Who released this footage? And why did they release it right now, in this exact week, in this exact month, of this exact year? Because tapes like this don't just fall out of the sky. Tapes like this are held. They are stored. They are archived. They are protected. Somebody had this footage in a vault for over 20 years, and somebody decided that today was the day the world needed to see it. And whoever made that decision knew exactly what they were doing. This was a strike. This was a targeted, timed, surgical release. And that means somebody, somewhere, has a motive that we do not yet understand. Is it a former employee with a grudge? Is it a rival family in the industry sending a warning shot? Is it part of a much larger dump that is still coming? Is it connected to the current legal storms swirling around other music industry titans right now? Because let's not forget the context we are watching this in. This tape did not drop into a quiet news week. This tape dropped into the middle of the most intense industry accountability moment in modern music history. There are lawsuits everywhere. There are unsealed depositions everywhere. There are old alliances cracking. There are old friendships turning into subpoenas. And in the middle of all of that noise, somebody decided to lob this teenage Beyoncé footage into the timeline like a live grenade. That is not a coincidence. That is a move. And the fact that the family is silent tells you everything. Because if this tape was truly nothing, if it was truly just a birthday, a phone call, an industry moment blown out of proportion, then the response would have been out within hours. A statement. A clarification. Here's what really happened that night. Instead, silence. Deafening, deliberate silence. And in the world of celebrity crisis management, silence is not neutral. Silence is a strategy. Silence is what you deploy when speaking would only make the situation worse. Silence is what you deploy when you're waiting to see how bad the fire is going to get before you decide whether to grab a hose or a match. Now, we've talked about the lap. We've talked about the hands. We've talked about the trembling. We've talked about the phone call. We've talked about the double standard with R. Kelly. We've talked about Rihanna, Aaliyah, Foxy Brown, Janet, and Diana Ross. But there is one more layer to this Beyoncé conversation that I need you to think about before we land this plane. And it is the darkest layer. Because what if this tape is not the only tape? What if this is the tester? What if somebody in possession of an archive is running a controlled release, dropping one piece of footage to see how the audience reacts, how the family responds, how the algorithm carries it, before deciding whether to release the rest? Because that is how strategic leaks actually work in the entertainment industry. You do not empty the whole magazine on day one. You fire one round. You wait. You watch. And if the round lands, you fire the next one. And if the release of this teenage Beyoncé footage is a first round, then the internet needs to buckle up, because what comes next could be seismic in a way we are not ready for. I am not telling you that more tapes exist. I do not know that. Nobody knows that. But I am telling you that the logic of leaks, the pattern of how these stories move, and the specific timing of this release all point to somebody who is not done yet. Somebody who is holding cards we have not seen. Somebody who dropped this tape with a message attached to it that only the intended recipients are meant to understand. And if you are Beyoncé or Jay-Z or anybody in that camp watching this footage circulate right now, you are not sleeping tonight. You are on the phone. You are in war rooms. You are making calls. You are trying to figure out who has what and what it will cost to make sure the rest of it never sees a screen. And that brings me back to Blue Ivy. And I know that sounds like a swerve, But stay with me, because it lands. Because the daughter of the woman on this tape is now the same age her mother was when this footage was allegedly filmed. And the whole world has been watching Blue's body language for months and asking whether something is off. And now, tonight, a tape drops of a teenage Beyoncé looking uncomfortable in a room full of older men. And the question that hits like a truck is this. Does Beyoncé see what happened to her when she looks at her own daughter? Is that part of why Blue is so tightly protected, so scheduled, so managed, so guarded? Is Beyoncé trying to make sure her daughter never ends up in a room like the one on this tape? Or is she doing the opposite, putting her daughter into rooms she recognizes because they are the only rooms she was ever taught power lives in? Because both of those readings are on the table right now, and neither of them is comfortable. And I want you to think about what it must be like, as a mother, to watch a piece of your teenage self resurface on the internet for millions of strangers to dissect. To watch people freeze frame your body, circle your hands, argue about whether you were a victim or a participant, argue about whether your father did enough or too little, argue about whether you were groomed or gassed up. To watch it all in real time while your own teenage daughter sits somewhere in the house, maybe scrolling the exact same feed. That is a horror I would not wish on anybody. And it is a horror that a lot of women in this Beyoncé conversation know intimately, because the industry has done this to a lot of them. And since we are already here, let me address the thing people keep dancing around, because I am not scared of it. A lot of you have been asking why the industry always seems to produce this exact story with this exact shape. Young girl, protective on-paper parents, powerful older men, a lap, a couch, a hotel room, a studio after hours. It repeats so often that people have stopped being shocked, and that is the real tragedy. The shock wore off decades ago. What replaced it was a kind of exhausted expectation. Of course it happened to her too. Of course there was a room. Of course there was a tape. And I refuse to accept that numbness. I refuse to treat a teenage Beyoncé sitting on a grown man's lap as just another Tuesday in the music business, because the day we treat it as normal is the day the men in those rooms win completely. The outrage you are seeing tonight, the millions of views, the frozen frames, the think pieces, that is not just gossip. That is a generation of viewers who grew up watching this happen to their favorites and finally refusing to look away. So yes, some of this is speculation. Yes, some of this is rumor. But the anger underneath all of it is real, it is earned, and it is not going anywhere. And neither is this conversation. So let me tell you where I actually land after sitting with all of this, because I owe you an honest take. I do not know what happened in that room. I was not there. You were not there. None of us were there. And anybody who tells you they know for a fact what was going on in that lap is either lying or selling you something. What I do know is that the footage is real. The room is real. The men are real. The age is real. And the questions the footage forces us to ask are legitimate, urgent, and long overdue. And whether the answer turns out to be innocent industry moment blown out of proportion or receipt of something much darker, the fact that we are even having this conversation about a teenage Beyoncé in a room full of older men in the year we are having it in should tell you exactly how much the culture has finally shifted. 10 years ago, this tape drops and nobody says a word. Tonight, it drops, and it is the #1 topic on every platform within hours. That shift is progress. That shift is accountability arriving late, but arriving. And no matter which side of this Beyoncé debate you land on, that shift is worth naming. Comment bait poll question number 3, and I want everybody to weigh in on this one, because I think it might be the most important question in the whole conversation. If you had to pick one villain in this story, who is it? Is it the man in the lap? Is it the father who allegedly went missing that day? Is it the mother who has said nothing for 2 decades? Is it the industry system that made rooms like that possible in the first place? Or is it the person who leaked this tape today with an agenda we cannot see? Drop a number, 1 through 5, in the comments and let's see where the room lands. Because I have my answer, but I want to hear yours before I share mine. And listen, before you swipe away, do one more thing for me. Because I am working on a follow-up video that goes deep into the identity of the man in that chair, the specific lawsuits that have allegedly followed him for decades, and the reason his name keeps showing up in the same paragraphs as Michael Jackson's estate. That video is the sequel to this one, and it is going to answer a lot of questions this one had to leave open. So make sure you are subscribed with the bell on, because when that Beyoncé follow-up drops, you do not want to miss the moment it hits your feed. And send this video to the one friend in your group chat who called you crazy the last time you said something was off with this industry. Because tonight you were right. Tonight the tape dropped. And tonight the industry lost the ability to pretend the pattern was not real. One more thing before I let you go, because my inbox has been on fire with this question all day. People keep asking me whether Beyoncé herself will ever speak on this tape. And my honest answer is, don't hold your breath. Silence has been the family strategy for 25 years, and silence is the strategy tonight. But silence only works until the next tape drops. And something tells me the next one is already loaded. That is where I am going to leave it. Rest in power to Aaliyah, love and protection to every young black girl who has ever had to smile in a room she should not have been in, and prayers up for a Beyoncé who is watching her teenage self go viral in the worst possible way tonight. Whatever really happened in that room, the truth has a very long memory. And the internet, as we learned today, has an even longer one. Peace, y'all. I will see you in the next one.